The Galactic Medical Council had seen many species attempt to serve in active combat zones. The crystalline Vorthak could patch wounds with their natural biosynthetic secretions, but shattered under the pressure of constant artillery fire. The four-armed Zilani could perform multiple procedures simultaneously, yet their delicate nervous systems shut down when exposed to the electromagnetic chaos of modern warfare. Even the mighty Corvin, with their natural armor plating, couldn't maintain the steady hands needed for microsurgery when plasma rounds screamed overhead. Then came Dr. Sarah Chen, and everything changed. The first thing Commander Thekska noticed about the human medic wasn't her diminutive stature, barely reaching his lower thorax, or her strange, flexible skin that seemed so vulnerable compared to his chitinous exoskeleton. It was her eyes. While every other species' medical personnel showed the telltale signs of combat stress, dilated pupils, trembling appendages, heightened pheromone production, the human's eyes remained steady, almost unnaturally calm. "You understand the situation, Dr. Chen?" Thekska's mandibles clicked nervously as another explosion shook dust from the bunker ceiling. "We're losing 3 soldiers per hour to injuries that should be treatable. The separatist forces have pinned us down for 6 rotations. My medics—" He gestured toward the corner where 2 Vorthak medics sat in crystalline hibernation, overwhelmed by the stress. Sarah adjusted the strange cloth strips around her neck, a stethoscope she'd called it, and nodded. "I've read the casualty reports, Commander. Mind if I get to work?" Before Thekska could respond, she was gone, disappeared into the chaos of the medical bay where wounded soldiers from a dozen species writhed in pain. The sounds that followed defied explanation, not just the usual medical bustle, but something else. Voices. The human was talking to her patients. The first miracle happened 30 minutes later. Private Zektar, a young Corvin who'd taken shrapnel to his primary breathing chamber, sat up on his medical cot. The wound that should have taken days to heal was already showing signs of advanced tissue regeneration. But that wasn't the miraculous part. It was the fact that Zektar was laughing, actually laughing, despite being in a combat zone. "She told me about her planet," Zektar explained when questioned. "About places called hospitals where beings go to heal, not to die. She said I reminded her of her brother. Apparently, he also complained about everything while secretly being brave." By the 4th hour, casualty reports showed something unprecedented: a 0% mortality rate. Not only were wounded soldiers surviving injuries that typically proved fatal, but they were returning to active duty faster than any medical officer had ever recorded. Sergeant Vexilor, a grizzled Zilani veteran, watched from the bunker entrance as Dr. Chen worked on a soldier who'd lost 2 limbs to a mine explosion. "It's not possible," he muttered to Thekska. "The Corvin physiology doesn't support regeneration at that rate. And look, she's not using any advanced technology, just those primitive tools and those soft, weak hands." But Thekska was beginning to understand. He'd been watching carefully, and he'd noticed something crucial. While other species' medics worked in the clinical silence preferred by most galactic civilizations, the human never stopped talking, not just medical instructions, but stories, jokes, questions about the soldiers' lives. She'd somehow learned basic phrases in 6 different alien languages within hours of arrival. When Corporal Hickness, a usually stoic Vorthak, began singing what could only be described as a traditional human lullaby while Chen stitched his fractured carapace, Thekska realized the truth. "She's not just healing their bodies," he said aloud, his voice filled with wonder. "She's healing their spirits." The theory proved itself during the night cycle. Separatist forces launched their heaviest assault yet, breaching the perimeter defenses. Wounded soldiers who should have been incapacitated began appearing at the defensive lines, not fully healed, but fighting with a determination that bordered on the supernatural. "Doc says we're tougher than we think," one wounded Corvin shouted as he manned a plasma cannon with his remaining functional arm. "Says her species has a saying, it's just a flesh wound." The counterattack that followed would become legendary in military academies across the galaxy. Soldiers fighting with injuries that should have sidelined them, displaying courage that their own species' psychologists claimed was impossible under such physical stress. The separatist forces, faced with an enemy that simply refused to stay down, retreated in confusion. As dawn broke over the scarred battlefield, Thekska found Dr. Chen in the medical bay, finally allowing herself a moment of rest. Around her, soldiers from multiple species slept peacefully. Not the fitful, pain-racked sleep of the wounded, but the deep, healing rest of those who truly believed they would recover. How? Thekska asked simply. Chen smiled, and for the first time, he noticed the exhaustion in those steady eyes. Every species I've met today is tougher than they think they are. Sometimes beings just need someone to remind them of that fact. She paused, looking around at her patients. Healing isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about helping people remember what makes them whole. As reports filtered in from across the sector, human medics being requested at every major front, casualty rates plummeting wherever they served, the galaxy began to understand a fundamental truth about humanity. They were not the strongest species nor the most technologically advanced, but they possessed something that no amount of armor or sophisticated equipment could replicate: an unshakable belief that every life was worth saving, and an uncanny ability to share that belief with others. The Galactic Medical Council would eventually establish the Chen Protocol, mandatory psychological support integrated with medical treatment. But they never quite replicated what the human medics brought to their work. The simple, revolutionary idea that healing someone meant seeing them not as a collection of symptoms, but as a person worth fighting for. The casualty rate never dropped to zero again after Dr. Chen rotated out, but it never returned to what it had been before she arrived, either. Because once soldiers across the galaxy learned they were tougher than they thought, they never quite forgot it.